When the Marines' argument finally ended with Hart Marine storming off towards the base's elevator and the apothecary returning to pick up his medical gear, Doc decided to see if he was allowed to ask questions now. It turned out that either the apothecary was a far friendlier space marine than any that we'd met, or perhaps Gravis had said something on Doc's behalf. Either way, we were finally given a rundown of the situation. Sergeant Gravis had testified. No, we would not be told how collecting said testimony had worked, because the mysteries of the Black Carapace were not for us to know. No, not even if it turned out that we were completely innocent. What part of not for us to know didn't we understand? No, the secret wasn't that all Space Marines were actually psychic, and our questions privileges would be revoked if we did not ask about something else. Gravis had said that we were a bunch of dangerous incompetents, but probably not heretics, and had backed us up in regards to the dangerousness of the demonthrope, if not the demonness. The Inquisitor had been informed of this, but had been dubious about the reliability of Gravis's testimony. After a bit of debate, the Inquisitor and the Marines had decided that the demonthrope would be immediately destroyed. Hart Marine was going down to observe the procedure, purely for reasons of protocol, of course. The news that they were just going to kill the literally damned bug after we'd spent all that time and effort hauling it across the ass end of the Imperium did not go over well. I mean, we probably should have been happy, since it was supposed to be used as evidence of our crimes or something, but still. Anyway, Sarge made a spirited attempt to convince the Marines that our demonthrope containment unit would work just fine if it was left alone. He was told that the zoanthrope was an abomination in the eyes of the Emperor, and destruction was the only truly safe option. Twitch, who was coming back into focus after being tranked, loudly agreed with that sentiment, and was told that he was not being very helpful. And then it occurred to Tink that it would be very hard to kill the demonthrope without removing it from the containment unit. He asked the apothecary about this, and was told that standard procedure was to shove the whole thing into a plasma incinerator. Tink asked what would happen to Spot, got asked who Spot was, and got as far as before Amy and Nubby both grabbed him. The apothecary accepted Amy's explanation that he named the containment unit Spot. He's weird like that, without comment. It was at that point, as Tink was being dragged away from the Marines and quietly being told that Theo could build him a new damn drone if we got out of this alive, that a horribly familiar chittery scratching sensation went through all of our heads. Veteran bug wranglers that we were, we immediately recognized the psychic screech as a sign of partial containment failure on the demonthrope. At least we figured it was partial, on account of how there weren't bugs coming out of the walls. Sarge immediately informed the two confused Space Marines of the situation, and abandoning all pretenses of diplomacy, demanded to know what the hell their boss was playing at. While Sarge unhelpfully yelled at the Marines, Tink pulled out his drone controller and announced that he'd started getting a faint signal through the jamming again. From what he could see, all the regular psi suppressors were offline. The Wraithbone one had been disabled, so only the stasis field was left keeping the demonthrope in check. Feeling pretty sure that he knew what his orders would be if he asked for them, the techie immediately started mashing the button to re-engage the Wraithbone suppressor. Through some sort of miracle, the signal made it through, and the psychic pressure of the demonthrope's mind began to diminish. For about 10 seconds, that is. Then Spot 2.0 reported a flagrant systems error, and a second psychic screech knocked all non-superhumans on the pad to their knees. Over by the Marines, Sarge and Doc hauled themselves back to their feet and practically begged the Astartes to do something. The two Deathwatch Marines ignored them and started arguing again. Since our guards were preoccupied and it looked like the shit was about to hit the fan either way, the rest of us decided this would be a good time to go collect all the weapons that had been left in the shuttle. Jim and the adepts were left standing in the middle of the landing pad, viewing the situation with increasing alarm, and were therefore in the best position to observe what happened next. A third screech doubled everyone over again, and was followed by the sound of Fumbles screaming for someone to come help him before they all go loose. Then the entire pad shook, and a geyser of fire and blackish-green lightning shot out of the facility's roof. As we all pulled ourselves upright and followed the standard guard post-explosion procedure of asking everyone else if they were dead, the Heart Marine punched his way through the elevator's doors. He began walking towards us, and then turned around as a pair of lightning-wreathed figures rose out of the flaming crater behind him. The closer figure was a human-looking shape, obscured by some sort of bluish energy bubble. Judging by the hat and coat it was wearing, plus the fact that the only other nearby psyker we knew of was currently screaming for help somewhere down below us, it was probably the Inquisitor. There was nothing indistinct about the second figure. It was the Demonthrope in all its horrible, unholy splendor. The 3-meter-tall, snake-like bug still had Sarge's hull metal shield wrapped around its head, but its eyes blazed red through the metal, and a pair of horns, as well as a far more demonic-looking maw, had somehow formed on the surface of the half-slagged shield. The big change, though, was the wings. Inside the stasis field, they'd been sort of vestigial-looking, but now they stretched twice as wide as the Demonthrope was tall, and they looked a lot more solid than we'd ever seen them. Before this, and when they'd been sported by the possessed Narlock and the Cogton, they'd been sort of indistinct and smoky. Now they were more like clouds of ink bound into tentacle-like tendrils, and green static crackled through and around them like the field of a poorly maintained power weapon. All in all, it was the most demonic-looking thing we'd ever seen, and mind you, that list includes a fair few demons. As the two of them rose out of the crater in the facility's roof, the lightning arcing between the Demonthrope and the Inquisitor's shield steadily intensified. Just as it occurred to us that we should probably do something to help, the Inquisitor's shield disappeared with a little pop. The man hung there for a second, looking surprised, then let out a terrified scream as the electricity reappeared all along his body. His back began to arc, then bend, then crackle. There was a final shrill scream and a horribly gooey crunching sound, and a basketball-sized sphere of slightly cooked gore and overly dramatic clothing splatted to the ground. Jim and 2 of the 3 adepts screamed. Amy snickered. Tink and Twitch simultaneously yelled, "Told you so," at no one in particular. Sarge facepalmed, and Doc looked up at the apothecary. The medical marine let out a weary sigh as the Inquisitor's hat drifted down to rest upon his compressed corpse, and muttered something about needing yet another new Inquisitor. Nubby, his voice returning, pointed out the big demonic bug thing hovering over there, which was entertaining itself by tearing a hole in the fabric of reality, and asked the Marines what they were going to do about it. Grumpy and Heart Marine both let out battle cries and charged forward. The apothecary shook his head and followed them at a more sedate pace. With a little mutter about them having fun with that, Nubby started to sidle towards the shuttle, only to be yanked into the air by Sarge, who was already bellowing orders and demands for information at the rest of us. Jim reported that the shuttle was still out of fuel, still had 20 AA guns pointed at it, and still had its long-range comm jammed. Tink checked his controller and said that his drone was coming back online and the Wraithbone suppressor might be salvageable if he went down to fiddle with it. Sarge digested this and then declared that since running away and calling for reinforcements weren't viable options, our only real choice was to kill the bug. The problem with this idea was that none of us had any desire to go toe-to-toe with something that could compress someone into paste with a glance. Luckily, there were 3 crazy bastards in power armor who would do it for us. All we needed to do was figure out a way to help the Marines without getting ourselves horribly killed in the process. A short debate was held, and by the time the Death Watch Marines had opened fire, a plan had been formed. It was decided that Sarge and Amy would stay on the surface. They'd do their best to assist the Marines, probably by picking with the small tide of demonids that had started pouring out of the newly opened warp rift, and try to avoid drawing too much of the Demonthrope's attention. Meanwhile, Tink would go retrieve his drone and the Wraithbone suppressor, and then try to figure out a way to weaponize it, while Nubby would do the same thing with Fumbles. Twitch would support them and lend his skills to the whole weaponizing thing, and Doc would go along to make sure nobody did anything retarded, which technically made him the man in charge. Doc was not thrilled with this assignment. Finally, Jim and the Adepts were told to go do something useful, like getting the AA guns sorted out, or unjamming the long-range comms, or finding some sort of holy artifact stored in a case marked "In case of demonic incursion, break glass." Anything that got them out of the line of fire, really. They accepted their orders without complaint and scampered off after Doc's team towards the partially destroyed elevator into the base. Those of us in Team Doc climbed through the hole that Heart Marine had punched through the elevator's doors. Inside, we discovered the reason for the Marine's violent exit. The elevator car appeared to be stuck about halfway down the shaft, and all the lights and control panels were dark. There was a maintenance ladder on the far side of the shaft, which, judging by the massive hand and foot-shaped dents in its rungs, the Marine had used to get back to the surface. We noticed that a few of the rungs had either broken or been ripped entirely out of the wall, but the Space Marine weighed a lot more than us, so we figured it was probably safe and began climbing down. Jim and the Adepts were a little more dubious, but they eventually gave up looking for other options and followed us. After Twitch popped a rung loose, which barely missed Doc, and dropped half a level, they decided that whatever they were going to do could probably be done on the first level, and hastily exited the shaft. We asked them to look into fixing the elevator while they were at it. The signal from Spot and the volume of Fumble's periodic incoherent psychic shouts peaked 3 levels below the stuck elevator, and we decided to exit the shaft. Tink suffered a minor heart attack when the first thing he saw after prying open the doors was a pair of turrets aimed at his nose. Luckily, they didn't seem to register him as a threat, and the rest of us managed to catch the techie as he reflectively dodged backwards into the shaft. After a little debate over whether the turrets were just waiting for us to let our guard down, which ended with Nubby tossing a half-eaten ration bar at one of them to see if they'd return fire, we all climbed through the doors. We found ourselves in a short hallway that ended with a second pair of turrets and an impressive-looking security door. Another debate was started over whether the turrets would attack us if we tried to plasma the door open, but Doc resolved the issue by checking the door's controls and discovering that it wasn't actually locked. In fact, none of the doors we ran into on our way into the base were locked, and the turrets were just as immobile as the AA guns on the surface had been, which was both convenient and disconcerting as hell. I mean, we'd just delivered a demonically possessed zoanthrope to the place. Who knew what sort of shit was penned up down here just waiting for a chance to escape? Well, actually, the recently squished Inquisitor had probably known, since, judging by the ransacked appearance of the facility, he'd been spending the last week or so gathering up everything in the place as evidence of heretical experiments, or whatever. He was a bit too busy being an asshole, also dead, to share that info with us, though. Anyway, none of us, not even Twitch, had time to spare worrying about what was in the base or why its security was offline. because we could hear and feel the battle going on back up on the pad. We followed Spot's signal, rushing through hallways and across recently stripped rooms without incident, until we finally reached a security door with a piece of paper that said evidence storage taped to it. We opened the door, which led to yet another turret-filled hallway, at the exact same instant as some sort of 8-legged, augmetic-covered lizard monster came through the far door. We looked at the lizard monster. It probably looked at us. Something in the room behind it exploded, and then Nubby slammed our door back shut.